Hello, everybody, and welcome back to day 2 of Conexkt Days. Today, we will have one session only, and we will be discussing building sustainable public relations. So thank you so much again for taking time out of your precious day to be here with us. We love having you join us for these insightful conversations. We have designed this series of events so you can spend your lunch break or your evening with us, depending on your time zone, or if you're watching The Crown or not. My name is Tiffany, and I'll be your host for this week. I work at the intersection of events, marketing, and innovation to design impactful experiences at Conexkt Canada. As mentioned yesterday, on our website, conexkt.world/2020, we have a listing of all of our speakers and their designated session times. Beware of the time zone change because we do have it listed in Pacific and Central European time. We have seen that people have started using the conversation starter, which is great. I'm on there and I've started a couple of conversations as well, and we hope you do too. There have been about 48 conversations so far. Again, it's a great tool to be able to meet the fellow participants and start some great conversations. We have about 167 registrants right now, so make sure you create your profile and join on to meet some great people. If you missed out on our session yesterday, don't worry, it is already on our YouTube channel. We will be putting that link in the chat below, so make sure you go and check those out if you did miss yesterday's talks. If you're at work or at home, we suggest you use headphones to avoid any echoes that you might have. Also, we want to hear from you. We do have Q&A chats throughout all of the sessions, so if you do have any questions, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to input all of your questions. Whenever you have them, we will get to them, or our speakers will get to them. We will also have polls throughout the sessions, like the one that will pop up on your screen, and we would like to know how you heard about the event today. Was it through any kind of social media, newsletters, emails, word of mouth? We want to know how it was that you are joining us today so that we can create a bigger community around this, because we think it's very important. Was it through social media, emails, personal invitations, word of mouth? Let's see what we got here. LinkedIn and personal invitation. Very cool. Great to hear that there's other people chatting to others about us. Invite your friends, invite your family. As well, to the theme of the series is short, insightful talks around innovation crisis. Our team wanted to take time to reflect upon the events during 2020 and its impact on innovation. It is essential to think of innovative solutions and implement them amid these global crises with a critical lens. We brought the teams together to prepare a special week on these topics, together with keynote speakers from our communities. We hope you will leave this session with ideas to ponder and tools to help you navigate these challenging times. Now, we are delighted to have two special speakers with us today, Darcy Christen and Perrine. On the event website, you can find more about our speakers, and we'll put links to their LinkedIn profiles. First of all, we have Darcy Christen, is our very own designer of clarity at Conexkt. Thank you so much for joining us, Darcy.
Hi, Tiffany. How are you?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm fine, and it's my pleasure to miss my nightly episode of The Crown tonight. To be here.
Oh, we are honored. I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, well, tonight it's all about trust. Building sustainable public relations is basically not messing up with publics. We as communicators, what we want is to send out messages, and we do that because we want to achieve a certain amount of effect. And basically, when we're talking about who says what to whom through which channel for which effect, basically what we're talking about is a slight degree of manipulation. And so what I would like us to think about tonight together is how we can communicate with publics while minimizing as much as possible manipulations. I'm going to set this on screen right now. And there we go for a little bit of insights about what we mean when we're talking about sustainability in terms of public relations. First, let's ask Chris Krebs. It's amazing to see that nowadays, if you say the truth, you're fired. Okay, I do have to acknowledge that this is in a very, very special circumstance. But basically, it does not say anything bad about the guy that sent out the message, which was basically that the US election was the safest in history. But it says a lot about his own boss who fired. But this is something that we see, unfortunately, more and more. We have been living for the past years and for quite a while in what is so-called alternative realities or alternative facts. A lot of things can be viewed from different points. And if you look at our COVID crisis here, if you happen to question anything that is related to the mainstream, you're targeted as a conspirator. Do masks function? If they do, why do you close businesses? And if they don't, why do we wear them? Now, I'm of course not going to do a talk on whether masks are effective or not. Of course, that's not the point here. But the thing is that whatever you talk about, and it can be a debate that we have in Europe about electrical cars, just as an example, if you question that and say, well, maybe they're not as green as we imagine, suddenly by many people, you are again labeled as a conspirator. And this is something that I find kind of worrying. We see that there's very weird times for communicators. First of all, our lines are freezing. Increasingly, you have extremes where people have kind of dogmas, and you have to navigate somewhere in between. But what is quite a great worry for me is that we're basically moving away from conversations. That means that we are losing our ability to be able to have a meaningful conversation on issues that are sensitive or with people with whom we forcibly do not agree. And last but not least, I think that in this kind of situation, there is a true erosion of trust. If you look at how scientists have communicated, it has been very difficult to kind of find what was hard science, what was soft science, what was the level of opinion. And there's been a huge amount of things that were said and their contrary, and that means that this had, for the general public, a true effect on the trust that they perceive for people that usually, as scientists, were seen as very trustworthy. So, are we talking about crisis communication or communication of crisis? First of all, I said it, we've been hearing everything and its opposite. There's mixed roles, at least here in Switzerland. The media have been sometimes playing the role as communicators, and especially for the state, as kind of spin doctors for the sanitary authorities. And some communicators have been more in between roles while putting things in perspective. Just to give you an example here, one of our prominent journalists, scientific journalists, is a member of the Federal Commission on Pandemics. So this is difficult because you don't really know who's playing which role: communication, journalism. And in third, we have science versus opinions. And of course, that when it comes to communication crisis or crisis communication, it can be kind of problematic. What are the hard facts? What are the soft facts? What are the various opinions? If we know the difference between what we call journalism on one side, that means just doing fact checking, and on the other side you have propaganda, which is, as Noam Chomsky tells us, manufacturing consent. We have fake news, and on the other side, we have authentic. Well, we see that communication and public relations is somewhere in between. Now, communication, in my view, is just the strategy of trust, because what we want to do as communicator, as a public relation practitioner, we want to build trust with strategic publics. And what I mean by strategic publics is a public that can make or break our company, our association, or whatever. So we see that we don't want to be too much on the propagandist side. That's where usually politicians lie. We're definitely not journalists. Journalists have their own way of treating information. As I said before, yes, well, some journalists are giving the line of the sanitary authorities and some propagandists are moving along. But the thing is that we as communicators, as we are seeking an effect, we have this temptation to kind of manipulate slightly that brings us here to this side. And I'm not saying that we're in the fake environment, but we're not far from it. And basically, we can stay in the middle because on the other side, we have independent media, true and professional journalists that are putting us back by asking us questions, by testing what we have to say and changing what is fake and manufactured from the communication standpoint to what is authentic and factual from the journalistic point. And that's where things become credible for the public. And basically, what makes a good communicator, what makes a good communication and good strategy of trust is when you have something that is a kind of relationship between the communicator and the journalist. And we have a tendency to forget this by times because simply, to make the story short, we have as communicators and public relations practitioners increasing means, while journalism, as we know, has means that are unfortunately decreasing. A lot of media outlets are struggling to survive, while many companies have huge communication departments. Just to give you an example, here in Lausanne, in a place where I used to work, which was the Lausanne University Hospital, altogether for the communicators that work on content, or the graphic designers, or also photographers. I mean, the basic communication team is close to something like 40 to 50 people. 40 to 50 people, if you add that as it's a university hospital to the 50 people that are down at the university, that makes, for this joint, we have something like 80 to 100 professional communicators. If you look at the media outlets that we have in town, they never reach that number. So there is some kind of discrepancy between the means that we have as communicators and the means that journalists have to do the fact-checking that the public is expecting from them. Now, when we're in a crisis, basically, the public doesn't need to be manipulated. What most people will say is just give me the facts and I'll decide. And that means that we really have to be as open as possible. If we do too much, very often people will say, well, listen, I don't support this organization. These people are crazy. Or you can have sometimes people that have so much credibility that they don't need to say too much, but basically we're somewhere in the middle where people are just asking to give the facts so that they can decide. That means for us communicators and to build sustainable relations, we don't have to tell people what they have to think. We just have to give them some options on what they can think about. Okay, so how can we solve this? Well, first of all, of course, as communicators, we do a lot of speaking. That makes sense. That's our job. But what we need to learn is to do a little bit of listening. Number one, communicators should listen. And I'll come back to that because I think that is the main quality today of a communicator that is seeking sustainability in the relationship the communicator is establishing with its publics. We need to be responsible, and that comes back to what I was saying. We have an increasing power And we should not play too much with that, because there is a temptation to use this power to manipulate publics. And with social media, we can see how easy it is today. So we have to some extent, have a responsible approach. That means to some extent also restrain the way we want to develop our communication strategies. And last but not least, but this is a matter of common sense, you can imagine, we have to tell the truth. Never ever lie in communication, even if it's a small lie. You have to avoid it and tell the truth. Again, whatever we do, there's a degree of manipulation and there's a degree of fakeness. I'll give you an example. Just by taking a corporate picture and posting it on our website, we're already manipulating. This is already fake because this picture has gone through Photoshop. We have put it in a certain setting. Now, if you add text that we have written, it is quite usual that we will do something that is quite advantage to our organization. So again, there is something that is by nature manipulative, and being responsible and telling the truth is just a way for us to be able to self-control ourselves. And that means gain, again, the trust of the public. This is the traditional linear approach. We see that we have a sender that is sending messages to a receiver. Usually, while this message is slightly encoded, we have various ways of speaking. And of course, the receiver has to have the codes to be able to decode it. This is usually used in advertising very much. And we will be using codes of humor, sometimes with a kind of arousing content. And of course, if we are appealing to the destinator, the receiver, well, the receiver has the keys to decode it. But in this model, which is the traditional model of communication, it's been there for years. Shannon Weaver, they were writing in the mid last century. But we see here that in this model, again, it is the sender that decides what is the message, what is the code, and it's just giving to the receiver the way to decode if the receiver wants to, or if it doesn't want. But anyway, the power is in the sender's side. That's a traditional linear approach. And what I would like tonight is to kind of convince you to avoid this linear approach. Certainly we have feedback, which gives us some kind of indication on how the receiver had managed to decode our messages, how our message went through what is noisy. Basically, noisy is what all others are communicating on the same subject. But still, again, it is something that is a kind of outdated model, and I will propose you a rather circular model a bit later on. And that's the kind of approach that we want to favor at Conexkt, because the truth of the matter today is that perception is reality. And so if I come back to the model, and if I see that basically perception is reality, it is nowadays with social media and the various channels, the receiver that decides, for one very simple reason, is that the receiver, not happy with what we send, he will just switch. She will just go to another sender. And that means that this model was okay for a time where we had mass media and we had huge outlets with people that could not decide. They could push whatever they wanted to the receiver. But now the receiver is empowered because the receiver can pull the information. And if perception is reality, that means that we have to think more in a circular way. And that's the proposition I would like to make tonight. Because basically, we should stop thinking that we can enter communication through the way we see our own institutions and the way we want to put them in front, on the forefront in the scene. We should always start with the public because they, as I said, and I'll repeat it, are the ones that are in power. Now, these publics, they have issues and they will give a name to these issues. And these issues, of course, will have an impact on our relation. And whatever the relation is, it will have an impact then on our institutions. If the relation is good We will be building gradually sustainable public relations. If the relation is bad, then we have a problem. And usually the relation can get bad when we have a crisis. So basically what we want to do is to bypass the crisis and to anticipate the issues that are relevant for the public, address them so that we don't have a crisis, we can build a relation and make publics understand that we are listening to them. And as I said in the beginning, we spend a lot of time talking as communicators, but we should spend a lot of time listening to the publics, listening to the issues, doing a lot of issue management and anticipating the impact of our communication. That means therefore avoiding crisis. Of course, sometimes it's not possible to avoid a crisis. Crisis can happen, but then if we know our publics and we know the issues, we can minimize this crisis and show that we are transparent. And once again, basically the idea is to tell the truth. And this is even more true when you're talking about science, when you're talking about technology, when you're talking about innovation. You just have to learn to say things the way they are and call, as we say in French, a cat or a spade. I believe that's the way you say it in English. But anyway, this is something that is open for discussion. And I'm happy now to give the floor to Perrine, because Perrine, she is a person that works daily with communication, science communication, and is in the front of transparency. So Perrine, it's up to you.
Thank you so much, Darcy. I'm so excited to talk to everyone today and talk about the strategies that we implement at the organization where I am head of communications, which is swissnex San Francisco. I'd firstly like to start off by thanking Conexkt for inviting me to talk on this very important issue. And thank you so much to Darcy for presenting first. I think that Darcy really set the stage for my talk, because he really kind of explained the context of the society that we're currently living in. We are living in an age of misinformation, and also an age where the role of the media and the journalism has really changed by various technologies, allowed organizations and individuals to share their message more widely to the world, for better or for worse. So I will just share my screen. And kick off. So basically, my presentation is really focusing on how an organization can respond to various crises that happen, particularly in 2020. We've been through a lot. And I will actually give firsthand examples of how swissnex San Francisco responded, and I will finally present a toolkit which you can actually take away and use as an organization or as an individual to apply in the future. So 2020, what a year. It's almost over, and I'm sure many people are really looking forward to the start of 2021. I really like this GIF because it shows, this meme, because it shows kind of a situation that I have been feeling lately. 2020 seems to be the worst year ever, and that's a fact. And I like this subtitle because this is something that has been a huge question for everyone. What is truth today, and who is actually sharing truthful information? Living in the United States, we have, for the last 4 years, been exposed to misinformation from one of the most powerful and leading voices in the world. And luckily that will change very soon. But this kind of really shows the situation as a global society that we're living in. Normally we would expect factual information to come from people in leadership positions from organizations from influential organizations and from all various types of media. And that's something that we are just not seeing today. So what is the role of organizations? What is the role of your organization? And what is the role of you as an individual who also has the power to influence the public and to also share truthful information, which was very key in Darcy's presentation. So we had three major crises this year. We had COVID, we had Black Lives Matter, we had a movement towards racial equality, and we've also experienced the impact of the climate crisis in various places around the world. So COVID-19, this is something that we are all still currently experiencing the impact of a global pandemic. We have now been in many places working from home. Restrictions have been once again tightened in places where I'm located in California. And as well, we're seeing in Europe tighter restrictions. Every part of our lives have been affected. And as an organization, early on in the year, swissnex San Francisco really wanted to ensure that we were responding to what was happening and sharing the right information, because living in a society where a public health crisis was politicized, there was two very different messages that were going out. And so it was important for us and for me as head of communications to ensure that we were sharing truthful, factual information to our audience. And I'll go on later to talk about that more in detail. Black Lives Matter is another crisis we dealt with this year. It was a movement, a mass movement from people demanding racial equality in societies where this is it's basically very prominent in California, very prominent around the United States, in colonial countries, Australia, in the UK. We're definitely seeing this a mass movement around the world. It wasn't just a movement in the United States, it's a global movement. Then we also have the climate crisis. So we saw last year there was about 4 months of wildfires in Australia. That were just burning out of control. We also saw the Amazon burning as well. And then most recently in September this year, California was hit with some of the worst fires in history. So how does this organization or an individual respond in this type of environment? So I'll be talking about swissnex San Francisco. We are Switzerland's science, innovation and art outpost in the Bay Area, but we cover the West Coast of North America. Our audience is both located in the Bay Area. We have a very kind of strong local brand in the Bay Area because we have been here for 20 years. And we really reach the innovative technology art audience in the Bay Area. We have very close connections with universities and with a lot of kind of local community organizations. Our audience spreads along the west coast of North America because we do cover that area, as well as in Switzerland. We obviously have a very strong Swiss audience, and we also reach people internationally. So where do we begin? Where does one begin? The strategy that I implemented when coming up with our communication strategy to respond to these 3 areas of crises, and to also think about the crises of misinformation that we're dealing with, is to think about our place. What is our place in these 3 areas? What's our connection to these 3 areas? And that's something that can happen internally in the organization, internally in your communication team, or in your organization as a whole, in your leadership team. I think this is important to take a step back and actually discuss various points of connection that people in your organization feel they have to these areas of crises. And that can kind of begin the conversation and also begin the communication strategy of how you might respond. So this is the toolkit that I have prepared. That basically explains the method that I implemented. And the first one, as I was saying before, is find a connection. So how can you associate with these various crises that happen? So COVID-19, it's a public health pandemic. As Switzerland's Science and Innovation Outpost, my strategy was to look at what is actually going to get us out of this crisis, and it's science. It's science that will get us out, and we're almost at we're almost at the stage where the first vaccines will be deployed. It looks like there's a vaccine coming out of the UK, I believe. It's 90% effective. And so as an organization in March, we decided to share information from reputable sources across our various communication channels. So across LinkedIn, Twitter, our website, our newsletter, that focused on sharing truthful information from these reputable institutions that were working on finding solutions to this global health pandemic. We also looked to local organizations that were regulating society. So we looked at the local San Francisco government to see, what type of regulations were they putting in place, and we basically would share that information, because it was important for us to ensure that our, we reach a lot of people across our digital communication tools. And it was important for us that we were sharing that information with them, because as an organization, we do have access to people. We have access to people through their iPhones, and sometimes we might have quicker access to people than people would have access to the news, for example. So that was our first way of responding to COVID-19. For Black Lives Matter, which happened the movement of Black Lives Matter really took off a few months after the beginning of COVID. And we looked to the history of San Francisco and to our place to really find a connection with that. San Francisco has a long history of social and it's the birthplace of many social and political movements. For example, the free speech movement came out of Berkeley. There was the Black Panther movement as well, came out of Oakland. It's also the birthplace of the counterculture, the gay rights movement in the 60s. So there's a long history of this social and political movement. So we really looked to that to really figure out as an organization, should we respond, and what is our connection in responding? We are very closely associated with institutions like UC Berkeley, with Stanford, and also with a lot of local arts organizations. And we also work with artists who are always responding to various changes in society and various inequalities in society. And so that was very important for me and for the organization to speak up about it. The third crisis that we dealt with was the climate crisis. Nothing new, but this year it became also very much so visceral and visible with the wildfires in California. We were already, as an organization, working on programming that responds to the impact of climate, the impact of the climate crisis. And it was almost the perfect timing for us to kind of really exemplify that, because people, our audience, they couldn't ignore this issue anymore. If they were, a lot of our audience is not ignoring this issue, but I think we were probably able to reach more people. So then acknowledging is the second step in this toolkit, and that's actually about the external way to go about communicating for crises. We decided to really acknowledge across our communication channels that this was happening, and that can be in various methods of communication. We actually had a letter from the CEO that acknowledged the Black Lives Matter movement, because this wasn't necessarily a topic that we were often communicating about across our social media channels. We definitely try as an organization to have panels of speakers that are, that represent all types of gender and also people of color. But it wasn't necessarily something we were regularly communicating about. So we did a new form of communication, which was a letter from the CEO to all of our newsletter subscribers that are located both in the US and in Switzerland and some internationally, to really show as an organization this was an important issue for us. And then acting on it. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we acted on the issue of racial inequality, which was more internal. We decided as an organization that we would look into educating our staff about racial bias, which is really very important because working in an international context and working for an international with international colleagues, we all come from various backgrounds. We have various education, and we have been exposed to different issues, and we come with a certain bias. So that was something we wanted to do internally to act on this issue. And then externally, we're still in discussions around how can we ensure that we are always presenting a diverse panel of speakers, for example, or how are we ensuring that all different voices are being presented in our programming. So that was also very important for us. In terms of the climate crisis, I kind of mentioned a little bit how we acknowledged it. We were already coming up with programming around the connection between human and planetary health. So I guess being an innovative organization, we were always trying to be forward thinking, and we planned this at the beginning or end of last year. And so for us, it was already in our communication strategy to talk about this, but then we were able to really look to what was happening locally in San Francisco and in California to really exemplify that through our various communication tools. And photography became a really important method for us because of the orange skies that we woke up to one day in San Francisco because of the smoke of the wildfires. And so that's also how we acted. We are, constantly sharing new insights about the climate crisis. We are, as an organization, we have 2 focus areas next year that we will work on to produce various projects and events. And the impact of the climate crisis is one of them, and digital society is another one. So this is something that this conversation that we've started now with our audience, we will continue to build next year. And then with COVID-19, it's still something that we are all living, and it's still something that we are communicating about. We generally we are aware of Zoom fatigue, and we are also aware of COVID fatigue. So that's something that might have dropped off in our communication, but now that there is a vaccine, that's something that we will continue to share, because I think it's important to also share hope with our various audiences. And it's also, goes back to our original strategy of ensuring that people know that science is the solution to this, and trustworthy sources are very important for us to share, and science will get us out of this crisis. So that is all for my presentation, and I hope that you as organizations or individuals can use this toolkit in your own lives or in your own organizations, even now or in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Perrine. Thank you to Darcy and Perrine for your insights. We think that in these challenging times, it's more important than ever to have these conversations like these about roles and responsibilities of communication professionals. We are going to be moving into a discussion and Q&A, so make sure you send in your questions to the Q&A section below. And to moderate this section, we will have Dr. Johan Rodui again. Hello, Johan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tiffany, and thanks to the 2 panelists. I'd like to invite them back on. You can turn your videos back on. I think, and your mics. I think that was Great presentation. And just a follow-up question, Perrine. Perrine, your toolkit, is it now just the strategy of those 3 areas, associate, acknowledge, and act, or do you have something more more developed that we could share with our attendees?
I can develop it a little bit further in PDF format to share with people after the session. I think that these are the kind of the key areas to begin with. And I think I can verbally kind of talk through it a little bit, associate.
Yeah, because I'm asking because at Conexkt we've put out some series of toolkits, so maybe there is if we could bring Darcy too and develop
Can you hear
one
me,
toolkit.
Johan?
Yeah, Darcy, we can hear you.
So I think somebody has to activate my camera.
Yeah, we'll put you we'll put you on camera.
Here we are.
Hi, it's good to see you again.
Yeah.
So I was saying, yeah, it'll be good to. I mean, we can talk about this after this to develop this toolkit and then and share it. But I have a question for both of you, and that kind of ties up with both of your presentation. Perrine, you mentioned that before you start with this toolkit, everything you communicate, you want it to be science-based, so almost evidence-based, science-based. But we know that science is not something static; it changes. So I guess that created even more difficulties to communicate. And then Darcy, you presented in the beginning that you know, if you start questioning the main narrative, you quickly move to a conspirationist. And that becomes difficult. So what do you do in between when, on the one hand, if someone wants to try to start questioning the science or the evidence-based, because if you say this is science, this is the evidence-based, and then if someone tries to be critical, and that's what scientists do all the time, they like criticize other people's work, and then science evolved. So how do you kind of navigate between those two almost extreme, where you have this is science-based, and then you're like, I'm trying to question this without becoming a conspirationist or falling into that trap? Any thought on this?
Yeah, I think from my side, what I would recommend and what I do in my work is always to look to the majority view at the time of whatever issue is being discussed in science. And yes, there is always science that's being questioned, but generally there is a majority view around a certain issue or a certain topic. And as an organization that's not directly, you know, we're not working on that science, for example, we're really kind of giving visibility to the institutions that are, that do have scientists and researchers working for them, such as, you know, EPFL and ETH. And so, yeah, when there's like things being questioned, that's when I would look to the majority view at the time, and to also refer to those institutions that are credible. Rather than individuals. I think individuals is when things can move a little bit into conspiracy. I think when there's institutions behind a scientist or an individual, there's more trust. I would have more trust in them.
Yeah, I guess because it's the scientific endeavor where you usually end up in a consensus amongst the scientific community. Although the challenge is, like, when you want to do a breakthrough in that scientific community, you're at the edge where you create something that is new and different, and then it's, yeah, you're not you bring something else to the table, and that might be challenging or controversial. What do you think, Darcy?
Well, when it comes to science, I'm a kind of idealistic. I think that science is by nature participative. It is by nature transparent. And science is something that is quite incredible when it looks into its own falsibility. I mean, you know, science exists because you share stuff, because you question it, because you discuss it. And that's the whole thing about the conversation. Now, when you want to transpose the scientific reasoning or scientific findings to make general public act, which is basically what we want in times of crisis. We do want people to wear a mask. We do want people to go and get the vaccine, that's for sure. And there's two ways of doing it. Either we force them to do that, say, no question, if you don't comply, you're going to get a fine. Or you kind of create responsibility. That means bringing the general public into the scientific conversation. The problem is that when you have these blurred lines between what is science, opinion, what is political movement, because of the crisis, because the scientists suddenly feel that they have a kind of citizen obligation to abide to the main narrative, that's when the public doesn't go for it anymore. And basically, I'm kind of worried about the vaccine issue because I don't know if people are going to trust the first batch of vaccines. I hear a lot of people that say, well, let's wait and see. Maybe somebody else should get vaccinated and then I'll come in. I mean, the other evening I was at the train station wearing my mask as a citizen. It was 10 o'clock in the evening. There was nobody there. Basically, scientifically, there was absolutely no reason for me to wear the mask. The mask, it was silly. Any scientist would have laughed at having me wear the mask. The authorities, for political reasons, for sanitary reasons, oblige me to wear the mask. And if I take off my mask, I'm going to get a fine. What I would have preferred is that scientists explain to me, now listen, if you're on a train, in a train station, 10 o'clock in the evening, nobody's around you, you can take off your mask. But if somebody comes up to you and wants to talk to you at a distance less than 2 meters, be responsible, put on your mask. Okay, these are two extremes, but this is where it's so difficult in times of crisis to kind of have this conversation because we want to act fast. So we want to impose things on people. And that's where suddenly the scientists, unfortunately, lose momentum. And especially when they are embedded in task forces where they're basically advocating the political message. That's a sign of times.
Thanks for those insight, and I'd like to, so some questions are coming in from the attendees, so I'd like to bring them here. And the first one is, what challenges have you faced at your organization responding to COVID? Were you able to respond immediately, or did you take time? And before we answer this, it actually ties up with one poll that we have, and I think we'll have a poll here asking the attendee too. That it ties up to this question. Did you or your organization respond to the various crises this year? Yes, no, and then how did you respond? And we'll be curious to know this. Yeah, what challenges have you faced your organization? And then the next question I can already, because they're all tying up together, it's what are leading edge organizations doing differently with their communication than typical organization? So we'll see the polls and then we can comment on them. I think we're good with the polls. Yeah. So yeah, that's not surprising that every organization or even individual, if you're like a sole proprietor, you had to communicate about it. A lot of people rethink the entire and rewrite the entire strategy, published on something on social media, or even a smaller group didn't want to decide to remain silent to avoid further problem. And I think that's probably also sometimes the smart thing, instead of jumping on every occasion, and then you might actually fall into almost like ethics washing into your communication, where you just pretend that you're this huge social brand, and that's how what Darcy said, that it was not authentic, but something that is more fake. But yeah, so back to the question here, what are leading edge organizations doing differently with their communication than typical organization? Maybe Perrine?
Yeah, I think something that we're seeing out of kind of leading universities and leading institutions is that the communication teams they're realizing that they're not the only people that can communicate about these issues, and they're really trying to train scientists and researchers within the institutions to be able to communicate them for themselves on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and they're really trying to train scientists in various communication methodologies so that they can become those leading voices, and they can build a community and build an audience themselves because of social media. I think that's a challenge. for some institutions, because sometimes it's a very personal thing, I think, for individuals to take on social media. Some research and scientists are excellent at it. Some are, not so interested. So that's something that we're seeing in definitely in Swiss institutions. We work in San Francisco at swissnex San Francisco. We actually run a program for Swiss universities to help them basically implement new methodologies to share with their communication staff, to share with their researchers about how to use social media. And I think social media is just so huge in the United States. It's almost, I think, probably a few years ahead than other places in its influence. We saw it in the election 4 years ago, how much social media influenced democracy in the United States. So I think the power of social media, even though it's becoming, a little bit, there is some pushback from the general public in using social media, because these issues are now so, people are more aware of them. I think that the power of social media and the power of individuals to use social media is something that institutions are still kind of working on.
Hey, I was on, as a side note, I was on one of the swissnex program in San Francisco for science communication. It was great. And then I think, so something you mentioned is to empower scientists and the scientific community to speak and share on Twitter, and then you have the scientific voices there. And I think it ties in with what Darcy was saying in your issue management cycle, where you say you have to start with the public. You cannot start with the institution. So it's a bit different. I was wondering, I wrote in my notes, if Darcy, if you can comment on this, if this is something new because of social media, that you don't start with the institution and it's a top-down communication and then everybody have the same message. Did we change this because of social media, where now we need to empower and start with the public?
Well, things basically changed with the internet, and social media is just reinventing the push model. The old timers like me, we grew up in a push model. We had mass media, very powerful outlets that were pushing news to us. And I grew up basically consuming what the 6 o'clock news would provide me. Fortunate enough, my kids grew up in a world where they didn't need to look at the 6 o'clock news. They could go on the internet and pull whatever information they needed and what was relevant for them. If they wanted to be informed about sports, they'd be informed about sports. If they wanted to be informed about culture, but I mean, it was not the mass media that decided anymore what they wanted to see. It was themselves that decided what they wanted to pull. And this is why most public service broadcasters are now in disarray, because they don't understand that. So they don't understand that they're not empowered anymore as mass media outlets. What happened with social media, and I have mixed feelings about social media, because we kind of, through Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and all these various outlets that are great channels, we have, to some extent, also reinvented the push model. That means that we are trying to push information. And basically, fortunately enough, that does not concern the 10% of the poll, which to some extent, willingly or not, decide to remain silent. But coming back to what you said, if you start from the public standpoint, may it be what you publish on your website or through social media, it's not only a matter of trust, it's also a matter of respect. That means that you acknowledge, you concede that your public is empowered and that you are basically coming in and asking them for a conversation. You're not just pushing information. And the problem that I have with social media is that there is a temptation with companies that most of them actually don't understand social media. They push for their own branding sakes. They want likes, they want to have a number of followers. And in terms of content, you don't really know what is coherent. They're just basically trying to keep things going with a lot of content. So basically, I think we have to be very cautious about the way organizations communicate, and we have to have some kind of editorial coherence, which basically journalists know about. Journalists, they're professionals of editorial coherence. Now, of course, I would like to say what good organizations can do. I would rather say at this stage what bad organizations do. Bad organizations, usually what they would do in times of crisis, but also usually, they will kind of centralize their communication. They will kind of control it. They will say, oh, don't call the guy from the field, call up the press department. Just to give you an example, we have here in Switzerland a crisis with our Swiss Broadcasting Corporation, and it's a serious crisis because there's a huge amount of allegations of sexual harassment that are coming out. And they're doing everything wrong in terms of communication. They're centralizing, they're locking up, they're not giving interviews to the media. And these are professional media people. And to an extent where there was recently a Swiss-German newspaper that made an interview with the head of the Swiss Broadcasting Corporation, that eventually this media outlet decided to delete and not publish because there was so much control from the press people at the Swiss Broadcasting Corporation that they couldn't handle it, and the interview didn't mean anything. So what I would say, if you want to be credible, and scientists basically usually know how to do this, you have to decentralize and within your corporation create what I may call ambassadors. That means that don't give a formatted message. Don't try and do marketing through public relations. These are completely different things. But try and empower your employees to be so much online with what your company stands for, that they will be the ambassadors and tell the message. And maybe they will willingly, freely publish meaningful things on social media instead of you doing it through your corporate communication channels. So I think this is something very important to do, is to create goodwill ambassadors within your organizations where people feel compelled to say, well, I'm so proud of it. I want to do that. But that's not an issue of communication. It's basically an issue of culture and identity. That's another topic.
And yeah, and I guess it's in the set of values that your organization have. Be clear on the set of values. And at Conexkt, for instance, we've written a manifesto and a business manifesto based on values, and we want people to agree on this. So, and then you set up a different strategy. I don't know if it's even a strategy, but you agree on those values. And out of this value, you trust that your ambassadors or people you work with or people that work for you will be a voice for those values. Well, thank you for this. I mean, this was a very interesting conversation. We could go on probably forever, but for sake of time, we've hit the hour now. And thanks again for both of you for taking the time and preparing the presentation. We will share it online as well. And I think Tiffany has a few last comments for the rest of the week with us.
Yes, thank you so much, speakers. Thank you so much, Johan. And thank you to all of you for joining us for day 2 here at Conexkt Days. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for more marvelous talks and conversations about unleashing the potential of place branding at 11:30 Pacific time.